a sunset, a beautiful scene with the light sky as the sun's going down in the west. This is the scene that we want to try to capture today. And in our 27-minute show, I've already prepared the canvas with the base coat, and I took my flat bristle brush, put it into a little bit of burnt umber with some of my odorless thinner, and made a little bit of a sketch guide. All I did was kind of locate my horizon line, block in where I plan on having a little rock, get a little diagonal zigzag line that's going to be indicating where my shoreline's going to be. And this is just kind of a guide, and it's going to help me place my colors in the different areas. I've got a couple of little lines indicating my values in my sky. I'm going to be very light on here. I want my sun down here behind this big, massive rock. This is going to be light, this will be medium, this will be dark, and then we have some fading away clouds in the distance. So let's start right away by blocking in our lightest area. I'll use the large blending brush. This brush is my large blender. I left the base coat in, and I'm going to just start with a little touch of yellow. That's your cadmium yellow, and a speck of red. And you'll notice when I'm putting the paints on, I'm using very, very little color. Work it in, and I want to build up to the intensity. I want to be careful not to get excessive paint. In this area up here on the canvas where I want my light sun, I want my sun behind the contrast of this dark rock. So I'm going to start working a little above this area and block in that first kind of band. That's why I put it there, and I get rid of the line while I'm at it. But I soften down into the edge of the mountain, letting it be a little lighter. I work from the top and kind of come down and soften. Let that kind of just glow. That's going to be my lightest area. I'll take the brush, pick up a little more yellow with a little touch of red in it once again for the sunset type effect. Warm those colors together, or mix them together and make them warm. Work that into the brush. You can make this a very intense, bright sunset, but I'm going to keep these colors kind of low-key and mellow. In the second band, I'm going to start away from my light source, blend in, and I'm using a crisscross stroke, and soften into the last color that I just applied on the canvas. So I don't have a hard line. You want to blend this well and leave this lighter area there. Let's go a little stronger. We'll pick up a little more paint. Back to the palette, a little yellow, a little red. Get the color a little more intense. Has more strength of color to it. And go back up, and once again, put it over here to the left. So it's stronger, and that leaves your glow, or carries your light impact to the right. I'm going to ease across the top of the canvas as I soften that to keep that concentration there. While I have this color on the brush, and I'm just going to go right in here in the water, because your light reflects in your water, and I'm going to lightly block in the water area, and be sure you come down to your horizon. Notice I'm losing my drawing a little bit, but that's okay. I just wanted to make sure I know approximately my guiding areas and that I have color there. I'm also going to brush down in the center where I'm going to have my shore. Now, if you have lost my guide, I know where it's supposed to be, and you have a little idea of where I'm headed, but I want to get these colors in. Let's get a little more paint on the brush. That's red and yellow. Once again, I'm just making kind of an orange value to bring that sunset effect. Sometimes I'll bring a touch of ochre in, make it a little stronger. And where the wet sand's going to be, by pulling this in a little stronger, I think it'll be able to help you see where that shoreline. Now, this is the sand. Once again, I'm not bringing in too much strength of color. And I hope you can still see a little bit of the guide, but that's okay. We're going to pull that horizon out. Let's go back over here to the palette, and we'll use the big brush again, and we're going to start getting that shadow sky in. Now, you want to watch as I'm mixing the colors. When you're working with an orange and you want to progress to kind of a gray or a blue-gray in your shadow sky, you don't want to leave too much yellow. So the first thing I'm going to do is go and pick up a little more red and get this light yellow-orange value and make it more on the red side. The reason for that, before I start looking for the gray, if I leave it more on the yellow side when I put blue to it, naturally blue and yellow make green, and I don't want a green sky, but I want that brownish gray of the late evening sky. So now it's more on the red value, and I'm going to put just a little blue in there. And as I mix it in, let's see, there we go. Now we're going to get a late gray blue for the evening sky. So as I mix this, I try to get my color value very shadowed. And if it starts getting too muddy, sometimes I'll clean my brush and go back and remix my colors, but I think I'll be all right. And once again, I'm working quickly in the time limit that I have, so even though this isn't the prettiest gray blue, let me get a little more. Let's use a little alizarin. I'll switch to a little alizarin in my blue and that'll bring it more to the, that's better. A little more of the lavender. The red didn't do the trick, so I went to a little alizarin. That's my favorite value to use for reds anyway. So now I have a little bit of my lavender type sky for a late evening sky. I've worked it into my brush thoroughly. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to block in that last value over on the left side. This is going to be my shadow gray kind of coming in, and we're going to come in a little bit and make that a little softer. Notice as I go over to my right, I'm going kind of along the horizon a little bit and easing it in. I put less pressure, soften that edge, and let the colors merge just slightly without getting too overmixed. I'm keeping those lines kind of soft. Let's put a little bit of this in the water area. We're bringing that color down into the reflection of the water. So we balance it. If you want to, I'm going to lose that horizon. Okay, I want to go back to the palette and make that a little more on the blue side. We don't want to have it too drab or too gray. Our painting will be very dull, so we're going to bring a little more intensity into the coloring, up towards a little bit more of the blue in the sky, and go back to the canvas and make that a little darker. But notice the softness underneath. When I progress in my mix, and I haven't cleaned my brushes, I find that I get a soft flow of colors from one color mix to the other. A lot of times if I get muddy colors, I will purposely clean my brush and start avoiding the mud that you can mix if you overmix your paint. But now I'm using my large brush and putting a little light fluff or cloud up in there to make them wispy and light. If your big brush is too large, I can change, but before I change to a smaller brush so I can control that flow of the clouds, I'm going to make sure while I have this large brush to pull in the color in the water. And I'm coming from the left in and lifting. Just lifting it over and getting a little of that value in the water area, leaving my glow of my light. Now I'm going to set this brush aside and go to a fan brush, and with the fan brush I can have more control. With wanting to design my clouds a little better and wanting to go ahead and maybe put a little shadow color in for my waves, I'll go into that same mix, not adding any more paint, and really using kind of a dry brush technique, not a lot of paint. Once again, I use less paint because I find I can control it better. I'm going to use the fan brush, and I'm going to just kind of spin it on its corner and just kind of pull out a little floating cloud and let it break as it's drifting off along the horizon. Also, there's an area of a wave breaking against that cliff, and this color that I have up in my sky, up in my shadow sky, is what I want to use down here in this wave. Once again, my horizon is still kind of lost, but we'll pull that in. I'm going to push this coloring in an area where I want my wave and let it just float over here to the left and taper down. Now, believe it or not, this is going to be shadow foam. This is not my wave. This is the underneath side of the foam that I'm going to have hitting the rock. And I'm using this for contrast. Okay, let's make that a little more lavender. I want to get that color just a little prettier. I'm not sure how it comes across on your TV set, but when I'm looking at it up here under these bright lights, it's a little drab. So I'm going to get it a little more with the alizarin and blue, a little more on the purple side, and get a little more strength of color in there. And once again, I'm just kind of spinning the brush. You notice I got a little bit of a purple tint in there. It's because I didn't work my paints too well. You want to be careful with that. But I'm looking for loose edges, and I'm tapering. I'm getting that feeling that it's shadow. Now, that has nothing to do with the actual water underneath. Okay, with the little 1-inch brush, I know I'm going kind of quickly on this, but I want to be able to get all the detail in that's going to pull this together and make it a nice painting. I'm going to soften my sky just a little bit with a clean, dry brush. And if I find I've got hard edges, I'll pat and soften, fade out the bottom, and keep my sky with my color intensity to give that effect of that sunset. But right now you don't realize the impact that this little cliff is going to have to really make the contrast and make that sky really as vibrant as we want. Okay, the sky will do for now. I'm going to clean my fan brush in the odorless thinner. And I hope I mentioned earlier that I had my base coat in earlier, as in I did my little sketch. And then I'm also using odorless thinner with my oil paints to clean my oil paints. And one student thought you clean up your oils with soap and water, and we don't do that with this technique. Okay, let's go in and let's block in a little bit of the shore with my fan brush. I'm going to go to the palette, get some burnt umber. Now my burnt umber is very red-brown, and I'm going to work that into the brush until there's not a lot of paint. Because of the base coat on the canvas, if I start over here, you'll see that if I touch along the shoreline of the water, which really isn't there yet, but if I touch along the edge and stroke down, I can get this soft blending. It's kind of like a, well, this is another way we kind of can paint here, but as I start on the right, I come over and just kind of ease into the last color mix and soften it. Then I'll start on this edge of the canvas over here to the left on the edge, put the paint on along that edge, and then just kind of brush it down and ease along the shore until you tiptoe into the last color. Don't leave any unpainted areas because they will stand out. So I'm tiptoeing with the warmer brown for like a dry sand, a wet sand effect, and letting my colors gradually merge one to the other. We'll go in and get a little more darker color on that. I'm going to pick up a little more of my Van Dyke brown into the brush with my burnt umber. And as I'm working this into my brush and you're watching how I push the paint in, I want to mention again to the viewer that I don't recommend students paint along with me in the short length of time. You'll find that it'll probably frustrate you, and there's a lot that I've prepared ahead of time, and I think you'll get more out of it if you just watch and take notes, and then you can do it at your own pace. Because I am rushing, so I can cover as much of new ideas and share them with you for you to work on at later times. I've blocked in on the right side of the canvas darker, and I'm also going on the other side, and this helps keep that glow along the shore. If I want that shoreline brought back up, I may just slide the brush on its edge and just put a little shoreline along there. And you can even allow some of this color into the water, especially in your shadowed areas. Notice I'm using the chisel edge, the brush is horizontal, and I just kind of slide it in and let that sandy area work. Okay, we haven't even begun to paint the water, but I'm going to set that brush aside and go back to what I call my little flat bristle brush. And this is a nice springy brush, and we're going to block in that cliff. And as we take the paint, the burnt umber on the paint, we're going to go up to the edge, and we're going to find that nice silhouette of the dark mountain in front of the setting sun that's going back behind. So I've got burnt umber on the brush. It mixes with the base coat that's on, and I just design any type or shape of cliff or ridge. Usually they have a drop-off or a steep ledge. And I'm doing this with my umber first, and if I feel like I've got too much light, I can raise it up to a little stronger so I don't have too much white, and keep that kind of a soft edge as it disappears back down into that wave. Now as I go back to the palette, I'm going to get more paint, more umber, a little more paint worked into the brush, go back, and you can see how with more paint you can make the color a little more intense and design a few other little ridges. I just kind of dab the brush and create different levels or different intensities of that ridge as it disappears back behind the wave. These are a little further into the distance. As I wipe my brush, and I want to get darker and darker down here, if I have a lot of base coat on my canvas and I find that my color is going to have trouble getting dark, sometimes I'll take my knife in an area that I want really, really dark, and I'll scrape and remove some of that excess base coat. Because what the base coat does, it not only makes your paints move more easily, it has a tendency to soften the color. And back here, I want that intensity. I want that depth of dark, dark brown. So by removing that base coat, I find that I can go ahead and get that color a little stronger. So I'm going to wipe the brush. In fact, I'm going to clean the brush while I get a paper towel. And then go into not only my burnt umber, but my Van Dyke brown. This will make my color richer and darker. And right down here in the bottom, you can see how deep and dark. Well, let's go for a little more of that color. And block that in and get that color into there. Block it in. And this is how I can pull out my shoreline. Just kind of reshape, and by leaving light areas, and of course I don't want a lot of light back there, I get that feeling of a shoreline. And I'm sliding the brush to design that little, the water as it goes up in the distance. I'm keeping that little bit of a diminishing effect. Now I can start merging one color into the other and blocking in. What I'm doing now is just roughing in the cliff and let it fade into that water. My colors aren't as deep and rich as I would like for the intensity of showing this scene, but we'll work on that. I may go back later with a palette knife and block in stronger colors. By going back with a palette knife, you lay in heavier color and your color is thicker. But right now, this can be kind of our rough in, and if we have time, we'll really put the intensity back into that. But I want to go on and get the water blocked in, because water is one of the most difficult illusions that you can paint. I have my foundation, but I'm going to use, instead of my flat bristle brush, which I'm cleaning at the moment, I'm going to set it aside to save it, and I'm going to go to a clean fan brush. With my clean fan brush, I'm going to start thinking of the color intensity that I want in my water. So we're going to go to some Prussian blue, and in my Prussian blue, I'm going to want just a little bit of that sap green, and that's going to give it more of a sea green effect. So I'm using sap green and Prussian blue, and I want to keep the sunset in there without getting it too black, and put a speck of red and get that a deep, dark mixture. And I'm putting quite a bit of paint on the brush. Now I'm going to come underneath the foam wave that I indicated, and I'm going to push a little of that color underneath. That's a pretty vivid green. Let's go back and get a little more blue. I want to keep my color mixes, I'm mixing quite quickly here, and I don't want it to have a awkward coloring. Let's get that a little more on the blue side and block that in a little more. That's better. And now I'm going up underneath the foam, and I'm tapering to the left, and then I'm going to just kind of pull the bottom just slightly towards the shore. And I want that dark edge. Now, if you want to soften your edge, you can kind of smudge with your finger just slightly. I use my finger quite often to soften some edge lines or some shadow lines. So I just keep wiping on a paper towel. Well, I'm getting my hand more than I am the paper towel. But we want to wipe and soften some of that edge. Once again, pull it onto the shore and just loosely slide the brush to put a little color into the water. A little over in here, and let's find that horizon. You notice I'm sliding the brush and just grazing the canvas. I'm not putting a lot of the intense color on. I will soften this, but now I've worked most of the color out of the brush in this area underneath the wave, and as I wipe my brush, I'm going to ease in some of this coloring in the distance. I think I should have put just a hint more of that alizarin into that coloring, because the sea green color is a little strong. But we'll let this color go in there, and we'll introduce some other colors. Along the shore, I'm going to work the watercolor in. Now, we'll lose a lot of this effect as we go in. And as you can see, I just kind of use my fan brush to keep reshaping and laying in the color. But I've tried to leave my light impact on the water in this area. Maybe pushing a little color, you can get a little more wave in this area. We're building a foundation to block in. I'm doing a lot of blending right now. Okay, let me check and see where okay, we're doing okay. I now want to clean the fan brush, once again into my odorless thinner, dry it thoroughly, and I'm going to go a little more in the green effect. I could use the fan brush more to blend in, but I'm going to switch to my flat bristle. It takes a little more time, but I get a little more control, and I can do a little more better on the designing. I'm going to use a little of the sap green, almost straight, a little hint of the blue, but a much stronger on the sap green effect. And right up in this area of the wave that the water would be thinner, a little more transparent, I'm going to put just a little of that sea green or that sap green. Sometimes I use phthalo when I'm doing this illusion. And I'm going to brush this in. Notice how I'm using the flat of the brush and just skimming the surface and bringing a little more color interest. As I run out of paint here, I go into the background and just kind of pull that in and let it fade, fade, fade across the back, softening in. Let's see if my horizon's straight. Soft edges at this point. Okay, a little more into the foreground and more paint. Don't want to get too skimpy. A lot of times when I do a composition like this, I go through the composition, get my color mixes in, then I go back and I pull in my detail a little more carefully. I'm just taking the brush and kind of pulling it over the surface and losing some edges. Okay, let's go back to the shadow foam or the wave that we're going to have, and we're going to pull up maybe a little highlight. Before I do that, I need to go back and pull up my cliff in the background. Let's go back and do that so we get a better impact or contrast. Once again, back to the palette, burnt umber, and my Van Dyke, and let's go in here and pull a nice, deep, dark ridge onto the cliff and let it fade, let it disappear into the water. Still like that water's coming up around that cliff, so we don't have to paint all the detail. Sometimes I block in another little cliff, and by dabbing, you begin to get the feeling of the texture of the rocks or the roughness of the rocks, and you get color variety. You begin to intermix, and that gives a little better contrast. Maybe fine this edge a little bit up here, so it's more of a dark silhouette. Color variety is what I'm looking for, and a little more intensity of the paint. Okay, we have a definite rough end of the composition. Now let's see if we can go in there and kind of pull it all together. My horizon line is going a little downhill, so we want to straighten that up as first thing, because it is important to have that effect in that straight line. So I'm going to clean this brush, go back, and let's see if we can pull a little more of the sky color. I want more shadow away from the light source to pull up that intensity. So we're going to go back to that color with the little flat bristle brush. It's a number 16, and it's a nice mixed bristle brush, but it's not a stiff bristle. And I'm going to just pull that horizon out now with a little more of the sky color. Just bring it in, slide it over. You can use a maul stick or even a ruler to make this a little easier for you if you really want to get into detail. And just sliding the brush, the colors intermix. So we have a soft flowing of one color into the other. That begins to pull the horizon out, and I may need a ruler to straighten that one out, but we'll leave it for now, and we'll put a highlight on it with the palette knife. Wipe the knife, get the knife, just set the flat bristle aside, and let's see if we can bring that out with a little highlight. We'll use the knife, a little titanium white, just a little ochre in it. We want to keep that white from being a pure white, so we mix it with the palette knife. I'm using the thick paint now, your titanium white. Wipe the knife and spread your paint out. When you use that knife, if you spread it out flat, wipe it, touch across it, and get a little even roll right across the blade. Let me come up here and really come in close and see that nice little ridge of paint. This will help you control it. Go right in, keep the blade horizontal with the horizon, and touch and get that little spark off. And let's pull in that sparkle on that sunlight hitting on that shore back there, or that far distant ocean. As I come over into the shadows, I just let the paint kind of fade. You can see the little lines and the little detail effect I get. Don't put the paint on heavy. Go in there kind of light and just kind of touch. If you drop the handle of the knife down lower and lower, you'll find that more of the paint will come off. Even up on the little cresting of this wave, I may just slide down that little wave with a push and pull up that edge or that sharpness. I'm going to wipe the knife and go back to the palette. Load just a little more. Once again, I try to watch my control of my load. I've got another little even roll across the blade of my knife, and I'm going to pull in the shore, or a little bit of detail on the shoreline. By doing this, I'm going to hold the blade onto the canvas with even pressure across the full length of the blade, and I'm going to watch the end, or the heel of the blade, way over here. I hope you're seeing where I'm pointing. At the back end of the blade, I'm looking where I'm coming from, not where I'm going. So I'm going to squeeze in and just squeeze it out. Now forget where the point's going, watch the heel, and squeeze that out of there and get that little roll. Wipe the knife, reload with more paint, maybe put in a little wave here, a little wave there along the edge, and soften some of this. Now we need to go back up into our foam and do that effect with a fan brush. You'll find it's much better. So I'll take a clean fan brush, titanium white, little that nice glow, that sunny glow, and if we have good contrast area, it'll work. And I'm going to set a highlight up on the edge, so the sun is sitting on the top edge of that. So I'm just going to lightly go in with the fan brush and touch it right up there and just kind of push that light up on the foam. Maybe have a little bit. Remember, we placed the shadow into there earlier. I might pull in just a little bit of that wave back in the distance. Okay, before I get too tied up into the composition, and I'm running a little low on time, and I've got a lot that I want to do to this to finish it, I'm going to put in a couple of birds, and then I'm going to have to work on my shore, soften these little colors. I want all this little soft edging. I'm going to dab in a little rock over here. Let's put the birds in. A little life in your painting will add a lot. So I'm going to put the birds in, even if I don't have to go time to go back and block in my rock, but you'll be surprised what I can do in 1 minute. So let me get going. I'm going to take my my liner brush and thin down my shadow gray. This is the color of the shadow in the sky. Thin it. Very inky consistency. Roll my brush. And I'm going to make a little elongated check mark. I showed this one of my other shows. We're just going to come down, then up. Down, then up. Make them different sizes. Maybe a little small one over here. Make a little, these are silhouetted. I'm going to come in with a little darker mix and put a shadow tip. Seagulls have that little shadow underneath their wings, or that marking, so we're going to put a little dark tip on there. Sometimes I'll do them in white, but we're going to leave these kind of dark. Maybe a little edging of a highlight with your base coat thin. Let the sun hit up on the edge of the wing. I've shown you in other shows how you can make little clouds out of these if they don't want to agree with you. We don't want too many clouds in this one. That brings a lot of life into the painting. Let's go in and see if we can pull it together now with a little bit of dabs of a rock here on the shore. All we need is to think of that rock as a smaller cliff. Take your flat bristle brush, dab on the little bit of coloring, bring a little bit into the water because that rock has to sit in, maybe a little more shadow line. Now we look for contrast, look for intensity to pull this painting together. Let's pull out that shoreline, a little dark, under the edge. Okay, as we're running out of time, I'm going to see if I can really pull this together with a few little wave crests. Put a little water around that, splash a little water here, splash a little water there, and it's fun how you can just throw in a little wave. All of a sudden, a little ridge of paint will begin to look like some waves washing into the shore with very simple movements and strokes. Soften the edge here. Let's see. I'm going to throw in real quickly a little dark. And if anybody tried to paint along with me, I hope you did a little better than I did, but watch the dark on the shore here. Watch the intensity this is going to pull out. So I got just a few seconds, and I want to show you what a little dark contrast will do. Okay. I'm going to watch my time on this one. Pull it down, take the brush we put it in, and soften it. And you'll really see that shoreline. Okay. Hope you have enough time to work on this one and pull it together, but I hope you learned some ideas on what you can do to create a seascape. It's your color intensity and your detail that you want to work on with more time. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week.
Paint with Pittard, with Lynne Pittard.
A peaceful walk down a shadowy lane with little shadow patterns playing on the road. This is what we'll try to capture today. Hi, it's nice to be back, and we have a lovely scene that we're going to try to work with today to capture nice patterns of leaves, trees, foliage, and some nice sunlight patterns. We want to capture those lights playing across the flat road and see if we can do a nice job on that one. I've already applied my base coat on the canvas. I want to tell you I do this to save a little bit of time, and I leave the base coat in the brush. This helps my paints mix a little easily. As I take the big brush, I'm going to go to my palette, and we'll pick up some of the light blue sky color. I'm going to go to a little touch of Prussian blue and work the paint into my brush. And we don't need a lot of action in our sky color, in our sky, because with clouds and all, because we're going to have that nice foliage. So as I work this into my brush, I'll go up to the canvas, and we're going to make a little light pattern coming from our left. So we'll start on the right, work this in, and notice it's not strong in intensity, so we'll work over and leaving the left corner of the canvas almost white, letting it lighter as we go to the left. I'm going to blend that in. I'm going to go back to the palette and pick up just a little bit more of the blue, get a little stronger. We build to our coloring so we don't have too much. A little stronger. And then as we work this into the brush, we will come up to the right and starting once again on the right-hand corner and working over to the left. That will make our light impact appear as if it's coming from the left. And once I get this kind of blocked in, and you can see once again that the left-hand corner of the canvas is almost white of the base coat. I've come down a little below the halfway point. I'm going to use the same brush. I'm going to pick up a little bit more Prussian blue on the palette and add a little alizarin crimson to it until I get kind of a lavender. And this will give me a little backdrop for distant trees. So I've worked this into the brush. And we'll go up, and we're going to have a loose tree line off in the distance. Now, I'm not looking for any detail, but I'm going to use the brush and kind of dab in or pat little areas of spots that will appear as trees later. And I'm just blocking it in. I turn the brush vertical when I want a tall tree, or if I want it to go lower, I turn it horizontal. Just taper down and allow it to get lighter as you go to the left. Once again, that'll keep our light impact over to the left. I'm going to go back to the palette and get a little more strength of color, a little more of the same mixture that's Prussian and alizarin, And once again, I've pre-mixed a number of colors today for this particular composition. So as you go in, I suggest to students not to try to paint along with me, but to make little notations of what we are going to be doing. As I dab this coloring in, get it a little stronger. Now I've got a little patch of blue coming out that's a little strong, which you have to be careful with. And you want to make sure you work your colors properly. Work them into the brush. That gives us a backdrop with a little more feeling of being closer due to the colors being stronger. Okay, as we go back to the palette, I'm going to just set this brush aside for a moment and switch to a flat bristle brush. With the flat bristle brush, I'm going to go in and I'm going to make a little bit of a design. I'm going to begin to draw in or locate the little path or the road and then go ahead and locate where the little pond is going to be before I go any farther. Taking the flat bristle, and I'm just going to use a little bit of umber with it and mix it on the palette. I could use a little of the shadow color. Right now I'm just kind of locating. So I'm using a little umber and white and working in. That was a little Van Dyke. I got a little Van Dyke into there. So I'm getting just a shadow gray. And I want to locate on my canvas where that little road is. Now I haven't done the background and all, but I want to get a feeling for a little path or road coming out of the distance. Now I'm not worried. I'm going to just lay that down kind of flat so I have a feeling of where a little road is coming out. I don't know if you've looked at the finished painting. We had it on earlier on the set. If you want to refer back to the painting, you'll see why I want to find this location. So if you'll refer back to the painting, the finished painting, this is where we're headed, and this road area is trying to locate it. I'm going to get a little more of the dark brown on my brush, or the shadow color, and I'm going to find that again so you can see it a little better, right around the edge as it comes out from behind those little trees. And then I just kind of loosely brush it in. You'll see that the paints flow fairly easily with the base coat on the canvas. This makes it all work in our favor to get better illusions. That's going to be our path, our road. And then we're going to have a little pond over here to the left. And I'll just locate that right for the moment, with a little of this dark color. Then we'll go back to that brush, the one we were just mixing in. And as we go back to the larger brush, we want to realize we're going to have a little bit of that background or sky color into the water area. So I'm going to use the same large brush I had, and back in the distance, just going to touch along that pond area and pull down just lightly. That will help establish it. And I need to bring down over here and level that off. I'm looking for a little more of a level edge in the backdrop. All we're doing is really trying to set up a pattern or set up a backdrop for our interesting areas. I'm going to set my large brush aside for a minute, and I'm going to switch to a fan brush. Now, a fan brush is used for a lot of different illusions, but this time we're just going to block in the flat of the land. I'm going to take the fan brush and use a little titanium white, just the slightest hint of yellow. Now, on my palette, I've pre-mixed a lot of my yellow and sap green and my yellow and Prussian blue to give me a large variety of colors. If you look at my palette closely, you'll see that I have different shades of green going from light to dark. Well, all I did was take a little time to save time in the taping and mix these colors. So you just mix up a variety of the colors you think you would like in your composition. With the lighter green, and this is mostly titanium white with a little bit of that yellow and a speck of green, I'm going to go into the background or into the distance and just kind of block it in, level it off at the bottom, and get a light coloring across the flat area of land back there. I'm just kind of easing into the existing color. If you can see, I'm just sliding the brush horizontally to block in very, very light, distant color. We'll get the shadow patterns later. This begins to help me get a feeling of my massed areas, of the area of the land, of the water, and the road. So this is what I'm looking for as I work in this technique. We'll go back to the palette again, get a little more strength of color, get a little more pigment, or the yellow and the green into it, and let's start bringing in a little. Now I'm going to start kind of designing shadows. I use the brush and just kind of walk it and make these little kind of horizontal lines to indicate little shadow patterns, keeping it lighter on the left and darker as we get over into the right. The closer we get, or the closer we come up to the road, I push on the brush a little harder and get little patches of grass or clumps of grass. You can almost see the little pieces that the back of the brush will design. Going to have a little over in here. As I get my lights in, then I'll be able to work a little more easily with my dark. So I'm just putting kind of lines in, and I'll fill in with my variety of shades to get those shadow patterns going. I'm softening. The more I pat it, the more it mixes with the base coat and softens. Okay, so that's a little light in the distance. I'm going to pick up a little more coloring, get a little more strength with the green color, but I'm still keeping the white. I don't want to get too dark too soon. And let's put in a few other colors. The more color you allow in this composition, the more interest you're going to have. So as I block this out around the edge of the path, I might push in a little more extra depth of color and block it in. It's really quite simple, the technique, and I'm keeping it loose. I'm not trying to tighten up and make detailed work at this point. I'm still trying to keep it just lightly suggested with my lighter colors. I'm keeping the colors very light now because as we progress through the painting, we will get deeper and deeper with the coloring. I'm going to switch now to our 1-inch foliage brush. The foliage brush will work very easily to block in areas and give us a little more detail. As I go for the trees and the areas blocked in, I still have my banks. I still have a lot of shadows work that I want to do. But as I pull my painting up, I like to work on it in certain areas till I get the entire feeling. I'll use this brush, and I'm going to keep in mind my concentration of light. I have my light to my left in the composition, so I'm going to go from my left, very light, then I'll have a medium value, then I'll go to my shadow on my right. So we're going to go ahead and block that in as we're making our trees. With the 1-inch brush, I'm going to go to some of my lighter color, which is just some titanium white, once again, with my yellow and a little sap green. And with this mix, I'm going to just pat the brush. I don't like to load it too heavily. I kind of pull the color down, and then I just kind of pat into it to keep the bristles loose. I don't want the bristles matted together because this will give me a better texturing or loose leaf feeling. As I go back up to the canvas, I'm going to concentrate. I have a grouping of trees that's between the road and the pond, and I'm going to go in this area, and just realizing that I have this type of tree feeling there, I'm going to go right in and just lightly pat on the left side of this grouping. Now I'm keeping in the mind that my light is going to be hitting the left side of the tree, so I just lightly pat a little bit on, maybe a little bit of bushwork down along the edge of the pond, and just have that little bit. There's trees over here on the left. We won't see too much of the light there, but maybe right on the edge of the canvas will allow a little bit of this. And I'm just patting little specks of paint, not looking for detail. If we're going to have a little feeling of trees over here in the corner, we could just lightly put a few of those in at this time. I try to allow my background to show through. I don't want to cover it in or block it in solid. By patting, you get the little specks that give the detail of individual leaves. We'll go back to the palette, and we'll get what I call my medium value, the same color mixes, but with less white and more strength. So I'm going to more of a medium color green. This is, once again, my yellow and my sap with less white into it. For a lot more variety, you can go ahead and you could be putting your ochre into it and make it a little warmer. So this is a little stronger, and I'm going to come right in and kind of touch into this and kind of touch the edge and block in a little tree area. Leave variety, leave patterns. Don't block them in solid when you're making trees because that makes it dense. It makes it look like it's been pruned by a nursery person, nurseryman. Okay, here's a little bush over here, and I'm going to use a little of this dark on the bottom of this tree because usually there's darks at the shadows. I'm going to check here. We'll block in just a little more of this color along the edge of the road and a little more over here. While I have the colors on my brush, I like to kind of balance and get the colors kind of blocked in and get more of a feeling for what we're working for. Okay, I didn't put any here. I'm going to save that for shadow. Over here on the left corner of the canvas, I'll have more of a shadow type tree. We'll go now and we'll go a little darker, same color mix. This time I believe I put in this mix a little blue and ochre together, which gives me a deeper, richer green. I'm getting darker, and I'm still keeping that brush patted. If you look on the palette, how I'm patting into the paint to keep the bristles separated. Don't let them mat together. Okay, with this, let's go a little bit down at the foot of these trees. Just kind of tap it in. You get a little loose feeling down at the distance here. And on the right side, now this is our shadow side of this tree, we're blocking it in. That gives me still the impression that my light is coming from my left. We're also going to have a shadow cast down across the road, and we're going to bring a little of this shadow on the grasses from this. The road will paint the shadow with a deeper value of brown. So as you design this, you use your shadow patterns and play those with a lot of interest. We'll bring up a little more contrast here. You can see now how I'm beginning to get a feeling of guiding my light. A lot of this will be pulled together as we come in and do the trunks of the trees. I need a little more of that color on my brush, so I'm going to go to the palette, get it a little darker, and bring just a little more coloring off to this grouping over here. Make this more shadowed or darker. Down underneath, along the shore of the little pond we're going to be having. Sometimes you like to pull a little of that coloring into the water for reflections. Just kind of catch the edge just gently and pull it. So you get that feeling of some of the tree effect reflecting down in. I want to check and look back for a minute. I think I need to pull a little more coloring over on the right and a little more depth of color on the left. Keep these edges loose. I stress that because it'll make a big difference in your finished composition. Okay, we've got a lot to do to build on the road, and we need to pull those trunks in. I think once you see the trunks, you'll see what I'm trying to achieve in this one. So I'm going to put the foliage brush aside, and I can come back to that because I'm going to put some other reflective lights. I'm going to just set it right on my palette, and I'm going to go to my liner brush for a minute and get a feeling for those trunks and trees. Now you can, if you like, take your palette knife and put these in, but I like a little more control, so I'm going to use my liner, and I've got my smaller palette here that I will work with, and as I go over to the canvas, I have to dip into my thinner and thin the color mix that I want. And right now I'm using a mixture of Van Dyke Brown and Burnt Umber, letting it be dark to start. With this mix, as I thin it, you must thin the paint. I think you can see here, if I tilt it, it'll run, and that's what I want. I want it like a watercolor consistency. As I mix this, load your brush, roll your brush into the thin paint for your liner, and we'll plant those trees. I'm going to have one kind of in the distance back there, and we're just going to touch the canvas, pull up, and let it kind of fade. And I'll get a little more paint, thicken it up just a little bit at the bottom. We're going to have one a little closer. As you can see, the paint will flow off very, very easily with the thinner in it. And I'm just going to design a little bit of my trunks and trees. Back over here, if you'll come to the left side of the canvas, you'll see over here we have maybe a little tree off in the distance, little twigs. And all I'm trying to do is give a feeling of different trees, maybe bring a low-hanging branch. And then your painting begins to take a little more shape. Let's get a little more interest in this tree. And just by touching the liner, I'm kind of tilting my hand up. Let's see if I can keep my hand down. Using the point of the liner and designing those trees. You want to always remember as you're doing liner brush trees that you keep the bottom thicker, and I always connect in. I always come back to the base of the tree, connect in, and always go out to the branches. Otherwise, I have a tendency, if I load my brush and come out here to the corner and start on a heavy branch, the branch like this one will get heavier than what we have holding it up, and that's just not the proper illusion we want. So as I pull in a few little loose branches here and there, it'll give you a little better idea of what we're trying to achieve. So we have two nice little trees. We want to keep in mind our shadowing in our road. We can use a little of this color with some white while we're working and just cast that shadow down across the road. Just kind of pull it as it goes across. We'll soften it and pull this one. So all I'm doing is using a little of the same color mix and casting a shadow from the trunk across the surface of that road. I'll pull some bushes and some other items around it to help plant that, but for right now, I'm looking to get that interest there. Maybe a little bit of the dark back here in the distant ones. The trunks really help tie it together. I'm going to thin this just a little more and use a little white, and I want that highlight. Remember, we're concentrating on guiding our light through the painting, so with a little white and a touch of umber as I mix it, I'm going to pull a little, see if you can come over on that side, pull a little light on the left side of my tree because my light's coming from my left. So I'm just pulling it up and putting a little of this lighter white or umber color on that edge. And your light plays through those trees, so you don't want to get too much in the detail. If my lines are too abrupt or harsh, I can use the handle of the liner and just kind of intermix those colors so they soften together, so we don't have abrupt or hard lines in there. Okay, As we go on through this, let's go back to the shoreline and of the little pond. I'm going to go back to a fan brush. And with the fan brush, we're going to go right ahead and use a little of this brown or umber mix. And I don't want it to get too thin. This I thinned a little bit, so I have to be cautious. If I get too thin, it'll come off too easily. Then I'm going to go back to my larger palette so I get the right consistency. Consistency of paint makes all the difference in the performance of what's going to be happening on your palette. So I want the paint thick and creamy, not too thin, so I'm going back to the right from the tube mix of some umber and Van Dyke brown, working it into the brush thoroughly. If you can see on my palette, I'm working the paint in. It's dry, so it's going to feel dry. So then we can go in and down and come back to the the canvas, and go right down along the shoreline and kind of block that in. As I just pat that coloring right along where the water and the land will meet, I'm going to pull it just slightly and get that coloring in. Just lightly pull down and then gently, gently pull across it. So we have a nice little pond there. We have an area of land here between the road and the pond that we want to break up. So I'm going to use a little of this color for contrast and just kind of block that in. I'm keeping the brush horizontal. This helps keep the land laying flat so I don't end up with too much of a height to it. And right along the shore, or not the shore, the roadway, usually because the light's over to our left, we'll have that shadow. Soften your shadows. Normally, depending on the intensity of the light of the day, will depend on how strong your shadows are. I'm using my umber and my brown to kind of loosen this up. We'll pretend like there's a tree off to our left, off the canvas, and we want to put some nice shadow patterns on the roadway in here to create more interest. So we have our trunks, the strength of the trunks there, and we're going to block in little browns also in this area. Let's go in and concentrate now on guiding our light patterns here on the road. You can put little puddles on the road, you can put a fence going beside your road, you can also take in and put some little rocks and boulders. We'll see how many of those little details we can get in to really polish the painting up. We're doing pretty good on time today. So as we go into this area and try to create a little more interest, we will try to get a really interesting pattern. So I'm sure you've walked down a shadowy lane and had that feeling of the interest of the patterns. Let's go back to the palette and get a little more brown and umber once again, quite dark, so we'll get a little more strength. We have that road we're going to work with. Now I'm using the fan brush still as I work. I will switch to my flat bristle brush in the same color in a minute, but right now I want to just go ahead and make sure I get enough depth or enough shadow. Over here at the left, along the edge, if I place that right along the grass line where the grass comes up to the road, you can see how automatically it kind of pushes that grass, pushes that down into the shadows. Shadow has a tendency, dark colors push back and your highlights spring forward. So you want to keep that in mind. I'm going to also shadow along this edge just a little bit in a few spots. And I'm keeping the brush horizontal so I can get that little feeling. Now, as I just take the brush and kind of pat across the road, it's going to help have that feeling of another tree off to my left, putting little patterns or shadows. We're going to switch colors in a minute with our background color and create more interest. Okay, I think the fan brush helps keep it loose. And once again, I'm keeping my paints in a thick consistency so they'll perform for me the way I want them to. Okay, that's beginning to shape up. I'm going to use the handle. I'm going to take my liner handle brush, the handle of the brush, and scratch in a few little twigs. And this will give me a little more variety and a little more light up in the trees. Have a little bit of the light up there. Okay, looking back from it, we're going to go and we're going to pull some of that background color. A lot of times when you have your sky color and your distance colors into your compositions, you want to pull your background color into your foreground to balance your composition. So I'm going to set that aside, and for right now, I just go back and I'm going to put in a few little rocks, because rocks have a nice effect in this type of road scene. So I'm going to take a little flat bristle and a little of that same mix I was using in my foreground, and right back between the road and the pond, I'm going to bring a little silhouetted rock, and I'm using the flat bristle brush and just kind of dabbing on a little rough textured boulder that silhouettes against that pond. Here's another one, and maybe one here. Maybe a few little dabs. We'll put little pebbles in the road. We're going to highlight it Now we have to watch our contrast areas. If we start getting too much highlight over on the rocks up here at the top, it'll have a tendency to get lost against that little bit of a pond color we have, so we don't want to lose that. Let's bring another shadow down across the road from that trunk that's off the canvas. I'm going to just soften the edges by brushing in a little horizontal. It begins to lie it down a little better. Lots of interest is what I'm looking for in my shadow patterns. Okay, let's go back now and use that coloring that I was talking about, our distant color. I use my fan brush, and I'm going to go back to that lavender coloring, and that's a good coloring for shadow. So as we go over here, I'm going to, at the base of the tree back here, I'll get a little more of that blue coloring as it casts a shadow on the grass, down behind my rocks. Bring that in, just kind of a little bit of shadow effect, and sometimes a little across the road. I'll need a little more of that lavender and bring some shadows on the road. Okay, I need to lay out my land here a little bit more. Now as I work, I can take my fan brush and go in and I can really start designing a little better. This has done my general block in. So as I get my block in and my layout pretty well laid in, I can go ahead and go back and pull up different areas of detail. And I'm going to do that with a clean fan brush. I've been alternating fan brushes. I didn't bother to mention that, but I keep a couple of brushes handy to save time. With the clean fan brush, I'm going to go a little bit more to the light, or the white, with a little touch of green into it. And I want to make sure that this appears further into the distance. So as I bring a level of light in front of it, it'll help push that back into the distance and maybe level out a few areas here where the light plays on it. Between the trees. You determine where you want your impact of lights and darks. And I'll use the corner of the fan brush with just a little bit of my light color and bring out a little highlight up on the edge of the rocks. Just a little feeling with that light coming down and hitting the upper edge. Let's take the palette knife for a moment, and we're going to put in a shoreline and a waterline, and I'm going to use my titanium white for that to really separate this area in here. As we go in, let's just kind of use the knife and cut in right where the water and the land meet. This will have a very nice effect, and as I take just a little bit of my titanium white, I'll put just a little bits of that glow or shimmer on the surface of the water. You can break it up, make it like little fish have been jumping. I think I need a little area over in here, and I need an interest point right here of a little twig to silhouette against that pond. So I'll go back to my palette, and I'll use my thinner, and I'm going to put just a very interesting little Van Dyke brown twig, keeping the paint in the right consistency. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to plant a little twig. And if you kind of wiggle your hand, it's okay. My students tell me they're very nervous, but that sometimes works to your advantage. So we're going to have little twigs, maybe make sure that shadow is cast. I'm going to use the liner brush and kind of block in a little darker along that little ledge there, trying to keep that very loose. And I'm just going to use the brush to lay this down. Okay. You see, we're beginning to run out of some time, so I'm going to block in a little more strength of color at the foot of the trees. And I'll take time to sign it right now, but I will go in and work some more on this area. I want to bring in maybe a little grass patch and maybe a few more shadows and work on these shadows. That's what we really want, and you take more time and work on this, and I believe you'll be able to capture a very lovely scene. I want to thank you for joining me, and I hope you tune in next week where we bring another interesting show. Bye.
Paint with Pittard, with Lynne Pittard.
A lovely Florida Everglades scene with little birds seeking refuge in a hammock away from an oncoming summer storm. This is the scene we're going to be painting today, and we're going to do the scene with mostly the fan brush today. We're going to block in the sky, do most of the grasses and the trees, and we're going to do a lot of work with our fan brush. I want to take this opportunity to show you the versatility of this brush. So as we work, I'm going to work mainly with the fan brush, but I will be using a little bit of a blender. But let's get started, and we'll start straight in with the fan brush. I want to point out, though, that I have applied my base coat on the top 3/4 of the canvas. I did not apply it down at the bottom. The bottom I left dry so I could keep my colors rich. So up at the top I have base coat, down at the bottom just this bottom band so I can get my dark rich colors. I left that without the base coat. There are times when you'll want to use base coat and times when you don't. So we'll try to, I'll explain that to you in some of the other shows that we're going to be having. It'll work for you, but there are times when it'll work against you. So this is what we're going to try to help you understand the process of the paints and when you want to use them. With the fan brush, I'm going to go right into a little bit of titanium white and just the slightest touch of Prussian blue and start just a little light area in the sky off to the right. Our light impact will be coming from the right this time, and so I'm going to come up to the canvas, and right here in this corner, I'm going to have the sunlight over here and the storm coming in from the left. Let's just work kind of away from the corner for a moment, and with the fan brush, just blocking it in with crisscross strokes and getting it lighter and lighter up into the corner until it's almost that pure white. And I'm working into the base coat. I'm going to go back to the palette. I'm going to get a little more of this mix, the Prussian and the white, but I'm going to add just a touch of sap green. Just add a little new color into the coloring and get it a little darker. So as I work this in, area around this off to the horizon, block it in, long blending strokes or crisscross strokes, and soften it into the last coloring. Just kind of haze it. Let's get that a little greener. I think the green in it makes a lot of interest, so I'm going to take a little extra green and white on my brush just to show you can put a little green coloring into the sky. We don't want a lot, but it does add interest. It's going to give a different feeling to your painting. So we're going to work this in and soften it, and that's going to make it a little more interesting. That just was a little touch of sap green into that blue. And as we come off to the left, we're going to get much darker, so I'm going to have to go in and pick up a lot more color. I'm going to wipe the brush a little bit on a paper towel, get a little more Prussian blue, and because we have a storm rolling in, we're going to add a touch of alizarin to it and make it much darker. We're going to get kind of a lavender blue or gray and mix that in. And we'll start over here on the left-hand side and work a storm. Now you can see how dark that is at the moment. Just kind of, I'm stirring it in now because I want that feeling of a storm cloud or action. Just kind of blocking in on the left side and just kind of letting loose little clouds float out, leaving little patches of light and dark. Getting enough paint on the canvas to allow for rain. All you've got to do is catch and pull it down and make that indication of some rain that's coming back there. You can see we don't want too much light back there. We need to block that in a little more so we have the sky color behind it, and then we'll pull that rain down. And I'm just using the fan brush and pulling. A little indication of that storm. Let's get a little stronger with our coloring and get a little darker, a little more of the alizarin into it. Make it just a little more of the lavender or the gray. If it gets too purple, sometimes I add a touch of Van Dyke in it just to gray it down some more. And I want the feeling of a storm, a very, very strong storm. So I'm getting my color much richer at the base of the clouds, putting it on, and then kind of pulling that also. I don't want to overbrush this because I want that to feel like the rain is just coming out from behind or out from underneath the clouds. Soften that in. Maybe a little storm density up in the top of the cloud. Now, as I work in this area, I'm going to go back and I'm going to put some more interest into the clouds and bring in a little highlight. So I've worked in the sky, let it taper over, wipe the brush, and we'll clean the brush in our odorless thinner. I don't know if I've mentioned on the last couple of shows, I have such limited time that occasionally I forget to mention to you that we are working in oil. We use odorless thinner for our cleanup, and get me a clean paper towel. So if I forget to mention these occasionally, I hope you've been able to watch some of the other shows, and we'll see some of our future shows that we're trying to teach different techniques, and these are all oil paints that we're working in. As I work with the brush and clean it, I'm going to get just a little titanium white into it to bring a little impact of light on the upper part of the clouds. And that's up on the shoulder on the top part. With the titanium white, I'm just going to kind of soften into that last color and mix in on the edges towards my light source so I can really put a little more variety to my clouds. Wipe the brush, a little more clean titanium white, and just loosen up some edges. Let the clouds be kind of floating here on the edge. drifting in as that storm is kind of pulling in from across, well, off in the distant Everglades. I want you to see that a little stronger, so I'm going to go in with a little more of the dark. I feel that if I really want to show you the impact that you can get, I'm going to pick up a little more strength of color with my shadow and go right underneath that cloud, lay that bottom of that storm in, and pull that rain out of the clouds. It's a fun way to do rain. Clean the brush and let that be shadowed. There's no light under the density of that cloud, so we want to make sure we allow it to be nice and dark. Now off across the horizon, I'm going to use the same type of shadow value, and I'm going to find just a little tree line or shadow line right a little below the halfway point. We want to keep this kind of low and let it contrast right up in there. I'm just using really a dry brush at this stage and getting it kind of blocked in. I want that rain to be going over it, so it will be lost to the density of the rain. And now let's go back and get a little more of that distant lavender color on our fan brush and pull up those trees just a little bit more off in the distance. So I get my color a little stronger and hit at the base of them, kind of just patting with the edge of the brush or the horizontal line of the brush, and let that block in. Not trying to design any distinct trees at this point, just a feeling of that distance way across the marshes of the Everglades. Okay, there's a little hair here we need to lift off. Using the corner of the brush, you can usually get the hairs off fairly easy. Okay, I'm not going to work too much more in the sky area because we have a lot to do in the field. I'm going to take my flat bristle brush for a minute, and I'm going to go in, I'm going to find a little pond there. We're going to have a little pond in the Everglades, so I'll use the flat bristle brush and sketch that in, and then I'll go right into painting it. But we want to locate that feeling or that layout. So as I come in, I'm going to have a little area that's a little stream or marsh area right here in the front, and that's about where we're going to be. I'll paint a little larger than that area, but this will give you an idea of where I plan on locating it. Occasionally I like to have you refer back to the original painting so you'll see where we're headed, and that will give you a little better idea of what to look for. So if you look at the original painting just for a minute, look at that marsh area and go in and see where the pond is going to be. And if you look at that area, you'll see that it goes from dark to light, the left side being darker and the right side being lighter. So I'm going to paint it that way to give that indication once again of the 3 levels of light from my darkest side over to my lighter side. So I'm using the dark with the fan brush, and I'm going back to the canvas. And remember I said it was kind of dry. That's because I didn't put the base coat. So I'm just loosely coming down on the dry part of the canvas on the left, getting it kind of dark so the reflection of that storm cloud will be in there. Just brushing straight down. Then I'm going to put a little base coat on into the brush and start catching into the edge of it and coming on across. And the farther across I come, I'm adding the base coat to the brush as I paint so it will get lighter. And I constantly dip into the base coat and come over lighter and lighter and lighter. This helps me progress in the stages, and I use the base coat into the brush because I still want to keep that dark in the dry without any base coat for my grasses. So now we're going to start blocking in our grass area. So we need to clean our flat bristle brush. And we had a light area on the right side of the canvas, so we'll end up working with that light area with our grasses. As I blocked in the sky, I went from the light on the right over to the shadows of the left. I will create that same pattern in my grasses. So I'm going to take my fan brush, titanium white, just the slightest touch of yellow ochre, mostly white, little yellow ochre, and I'm going to block this in, starting way off in the distance, very light. So I just kind of use the brush on its side and just kind of pat it in. I'm not looking for detail of grasses yet, but I do want it to be lighter on the right and darker as we go over to the left. So let's just get a little of this light on there for now in this one area here, and then we'll come up and we'll get a little darker as we pull off to the left side. So I'm just brushing it in. Now if I wanted more detail, I would actually use the grass technique. Let's get a little more paint, and I'm going to use a little base coat into it, so we'll move just a little easier. And you want to be cautious. I am using a little base coat, which when I'm painting on my own and I'm not under quite as much pressure with time, sometimes I like to stick to my thicker paints because I don't lose control as much. But when I'm in a hurry and with this time limit that we have, the thinner the paint, the more easily it will go on the canvas and the less you have to work it. So I'm not working it as much as I would if I were wanting a lot of detail. So I'd add a little more yellow ochre, and I'm going to just kind of touch into the area here just left of the, actually it's about center canvas, and kind of dab it and let it soften into the area at the right, and leave little patchy areas. So as we're blocking this in with the stronger yellow ochre, and then we're going to need a little more strength of color, so I'm going to go to the palette real quickly and get a little more ochre on it, and then we're going to come back and get that a little stronger. And as I come into the foreground, I will fold the brush and let it get a little deeper and darker in color. Okay, we can still put a little bit of this on the other side of the pond, so a little light will be behind the shadows. So you can see how quickly the fan brush will block in areas and work with us on grasses. So if you flip the paint just a little bit, after you place it on there, you can start getting a little detail and bring that right into the waters, because your marsh grasses go right into your waters, and they don't have a lot of distinct coloring. Okay, to make that deep, dark, rich, remember we were dry down here on the bottom. I did not place base coat. I want to stress that, because if I had used my base coat at this bottom portion of the canvas when I put my umbers and my darker colors, it would have had a tendency to get light or muddy, and I want to avoid muddy colors. So I left this without base coat, and I'm going to go with the same brush. I didn't clean it, and I'm going to go right to my burnt umber. My burnt umber is my warmer brown, and once again, it's fairly thick, but in order to make it, I don't have the base coat to mix with, so I want you to realize what I'm doing and how I'm working this. I don't have my base coat to mix with, and burnt umber together would be tough to fill the pores of the canvas. So as I come in, I'm going to put just a touch of thinner into the brush, and I'm going to come in and it'll come off much easier, and I'll block in and pull in the shadow of the umber. And I do not have the white or the base coat to soften the color. So I'm blocking in and kind of merging gently with the last color that I put on. Let's bring this over to the right, on the left, and just slowly come over and merge with the last background colors. Fields of grasses can be very simply done as long as you lay your colors in and keep your light source in your mind. Okay, we're just blocking that in, and I want this darker. I need to get a little more paint. You can see I'm not getting enough paint off. Let's go back to the palette, a little more umber, just a touch of thinner in it to make it move. Let me move over here where you can see where I'm mixing. Umber and a little bit of thinner, and you can see the paint has a little more give to it, or a little more flow to it. Not runny, but just soft. And I'm going to block this in, and I'm folding the brush. You can see I come right in and I bend the brush over and allow the back of the brush to do my detail work. Along my shoreline in the distance, I can bring that in just a little stronger, and also even pull down and get a little reflection in the water. That pulls the depth of the water. Your grasses usually are stained along the bottom, and that gives you that extra depth of color. And I'm going to just soften the water portion. Okay, so we have a rough block in of the field, of the grasses and the marsh, and now we're going to go in for a little tree. If I have time today, I'm hoping I can get to some little palmetto palms off in the distance. They add a lot, but I'm not too sure I'll have enough time to put that one in this particular composition. With my fan brush, I'm going to go in, I'm going to block in the mass or the area where the trees are, the hammock. And that is just a large grouping of trees. They're kind of, they're water oaks. There are a lot of different trees out in the Everglades. And we're just looking for the general form. As I use my fan brush clean, I'm going to take some sap green. I'm loading the brush with quite a bit of paint now. Now you need to start working with more paint in your brush. I load sap green. Now I don't want it too clean, so I'm going to allow a little bit of my umber to go into it to brown it down. There's usually not a lot of greens in the swamps. Mostly there's a lot of ochres and sawgrasses. So we're making it deeper and richer. That sap green and a little of my burnt umber. Okay, we're going to go up to the canvas, and we have two groupings. I'm going to start with my grouping on my right, which is my major hammock. I'm just going to kind of block it in dark. And then as I start using the fan brush, I'm going to kind of loosely pat as I come out of the shadows up to the tops of the trees, and I leave an interest area or edging around the hammock and leave some openings. You want to see that interest of the background? I'm going to need to get this a little darker yet. So let's go ahead and get it blocked in. And then while we've got the paint on the brush, we'll go over here and we'll make a little one back at the back side of the pond and make that a little lighter. Another little hammock on the other edge of the pond. Also a little of that coloring in the water. Okay, let's go back and load up. I need to get that color darker, so we use more sap green. I'll not only use my burnt umber, I'm going to add a little blue to it. This helps get my color richer and darker, so I'm really looking for almost a black green. Sometimes I even add a little touch of alizarin to it just to make it have more warmth and be even darker. Loading quite a bit of paint, back up. At the base down here, you can see that makes it much richer. Our light is once again on our left, so we're blocking in and we're putting variety, lots of coloring, lots of shadow for this area of trees. And I just let it kind of merge into my ochre coloring and over towards the little pond. Okay, a little of this coloring at the foot or the base of these trees at the distance. I look for my general area or my general form that we're working with. You can bring a little of that color reflecting down in your pond. Okay, we've got our general form and shaping in. Now we need to start looking for a little bit of detail. If we have a little of that color reflecting down, I think we could sneak a little in there to balance it. There we go. Okay, we're going to look for trees and our details of our trunks, and then we'll start working on grasses. Once I get my block in, if you remember, I work mainly with my fan brush throughout this entire composition. There are times when I go in and I work this area more with my 1-inch brush, and I can get a quicker block in and get more detail. But today I thought it would be a little more interesting for you to see that fan brush, how I did the water with the fan brush, my distant feel, my tree illusion by working more with the corner. So these are the things that I'm hoping you'll find that fan brush and experiment with it, because it'll teach you a lot of things that can be done with it. I'm going to clean the brush, and before I go into too much detail or highlight on the trees, I'm going to stand back away from my painting just for a minute just to check it to see how I'm going with the balance of it and the depth of the trees. There's some areas in here that I want much richer, much darker, so I'm going to take the time to block that in with a little more blue and green. I want that very shadowed. Make the denseness of the growth right down in here. I want to block this in a little more depth. That's going to work it a little better. It'll also give me a little better contrast. That's because my light's on the right, and we also need a little more shadow on the left side of this one. So always keep in mind your light source, where it's coming from, and how it would play on those areas on the trees. Light on the right, shadow on the left, because our light is on the right up here. Okay, cleaning the fan brush once again. I'm going to start working just a little bit more in the detail of the trees. I'll use my liner brush to go in and work with just some nice little delicate trunks. These are kind of like banyan trees or oak trees or water oaks. They have the nice flowing branches. You don't want them stiff like apple trees. You have to remember the characteristic of the trunk will do so much for the impact of your impression of the trees. Let me get me a nice paper towel here. Okay, so I clean my liner. I'm going to go to my little smaller palette that will help me be able to thin my paints and keep a reservoir. I have to keep loading my liner brush, and with my liner brush I need my paints thin in consistency. So as I take my liner and dip it into my thinner, I have a little cup of odorless thinner right here. I'm going to make a little puddle on my palette, and with the puddle I'm going to go in with my dark and make sure it's very thin down consistency. This will make my paints flow a little more easily. Now let's give a good character to that trunk, and I'm going to roll the brush, loading it, and it'll have a little reservoir, and I can usually do almost all my trunks with that. I'm going to come in and I'm going to pull up a dark trunk and just kind of make it have a little character to it. And you won't see too much of the dark against the light. You'll find that when you're working in a dark area like we are right now, it'll have a tendency to the dark get lost into the dark area. So we will be working with contrast and pull that out with a little other coloring in that area. And we'll work with contrast to do that. Okay. I come in with the liner and I slide up, putting a little more interest, and let those little branches hold up the foliage. Let's go back and put a small one back here in the detail. Just back here. Let me see if I can hold my hand down so you can get a good picture of that nice little tree off in the distance. And once again, I know there's areas that have lost areas, but we will work on those, and I'm hoping I'm going to have time for the palm trees. Let's clean the liner in the odorless thinner and go to a little of our sky color, our shadow. This is our lavender gray that I had up here in the clouds. I'm going to use that color for the back side or the shadow side of my tree trunk. So I'm using thinner, going to that same mix, And I'm going to come on the left side or the dark side of the tree, shadow side, with this little bit of reflected, and we're going to work on contrast. You can see how that pulls it out. Now we can see the underside or the back side of it. Okay, maybe a hint back here. Usually you don't see too much back in that distance. I'm going to wipe the brush and I'm going to soften one color into the next, just lightly patting, letting the edge kind of get lost into the existing tree. Now let's bring a little, maybe a little light filters to the tree. I use just a little white with a tiny touch of ochre. This is also thinned. I roll my brush and I want maybe a little light to come through and catch little edges of the tree. Just play through the trees, because we do have a light impact off to the right. So we keep that in mind, and I'll pull up some of my lost edges with that. Maybe a little tree back here in the distance. If I get too much, I use the handle and sometimes lift off some of the excess paint. Okay, while I have that, I'm going to pull just a little extra shadow down underneath that edge. Bring that character in. Okay, usually you can take your liner brush and go in and just soften it. If your paint gets too heavy and you start getting too thin with your paint, just go in and lightly blend it with the existing paint. Okay, I'm going to leave the tree trunks just like that, and I'm going to go back and I want to work on some grasses. In the grass area here, we want to get a little bit of a waterline going and some detail work, and that's more in the foreground. So if I use my little cup of thinner, my odorless turp, and thin my paints with my darks, I can pull up some little neat little grasses. And if you can see, I take the brush, and if you load it properly, you can get lots and lots of grasses with this. And I'm pull up a little tall foreground grasses and let these little reeds be blowing a little bit to the right because that storm is coming in from the left, and bring a few little interesting detail points in your little swamp or along the edges. You can pull up as much foreground detail as you want. Sometimes I drop my eye level and I pull my grasses up really tall, silhouetting against that. Just bring in a few little horizontal lines. I keep this loose as I'm working. Okay, clean the liner. I'm going to use just a little bit of my base coat white on the same liner, and I'm going to find my little shoreline back there. Just kind of hit on the distance with this. Now you could use your palette knife, but we're going to have just a little bit of that light hitting along the shoreline, keeping it kind of loose. If I need to soften that, I'll use my fan brush. Once again, that's my tool that I'm stressing today. Okay, let me go in and soften some of these edges just a little bit, and I'll go back with my fan brush. Okay, maybe a little twig or bush coming out of the hammock. You can scratch in. There's so many details. I'm going to see if I can get in one of these nice little palms that we have. First, I want to get some little birds in, those birds seeking refuge in the hammock. I'll just use my liner and get some of my base coat white and make sure I load it carefully, don't get excess paint. And I'm going to come in and make a few little birds seeking refuge in it. I'll show you a couple of cute little tricks of how to make some birds nesting up in the trees. Off in the distance as they come in, I'm just going to make a tiny little check, and the smaller they are, the better. Make one kind of coming up here, a little flock coming in. And if you want to do birds like sitting already in the hammock, some have already reached the safety of the hammock, just use the handle and make like a little line, like a little teardrop. Just make a little dot, this is a teardrop, and a little dot above it. And they're little birds sitting up in the trees. Maybe a few back in the distance. Remember perspective, there's a few little dots back in here. And if you look out in the Everglades, you'll find them just nestled all up in the trees. And a little dot will indicate a little bird back there. If they get too big, you need to touch them, shrink them down a little bit. Okay, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I will put a little shadow color underneath their wings. Some of them don't stand out as well as they should, so we'll bring just a little shadow of contrast under a few of the wings. These are going to be like little egrets. We could pull one in the foreground with detail, but let's see if we can get a palm in. I'm going to have to do this pretty quickly to fit it in today, but I'd like you to see this. So I'm going to use my liner, and I'll do a little distant one, because then if with a larger one I would use my fan brush, but I'm going to use the liner. I'm going to pull up a little trunk, a little narrow trunk up there. And using the brown right now, I'm just going to use and make a little ball, which your palms out in the Everglades, they almost look like a little lollipop out there. And as I go in, I'm going to have to go over to my other palette and pick up some greenery, but I'm going to use a little ochre on it, and I'm going to just block it in, put just a little light on the right side, and then we'll go back and put shadows and all underneath so it sits down. You can also work with a little detail of this and get it larger, but I wanted to just try to get just enough in so you could see how you can pull some character of the Everglades in. Need a little greenery. Have to go over and get some greenery with the liner. Sometimes I'll do this strictly with the fan brush. If I just kind of bend it out from it, it'll have a tendency to get a little larger. Okay, let's use the liner brush and scratch in a few of the little trunks. The characteristic of this palm, I'm going to just stretch the palms a little farther and keep them edged. Okay, let's bring that hammock in. I'm going to go back to the fan brush now and kind of pull it all together and level out a few areas. Let me set my palette down and use my fan brush. This is the area where I can come in and kind of guide that land across there or take some of my white and my yellow. These are the finishing touches that you need to put in your composition. So let's just block in and pull that area up there. And we'll work on a few more birds, maybe put in an extra palm and all, but I hope maybe the guide will help you to add some new things. Don't forget we have a guide that goes along and will help you pull all these little details together. I want to thank you for watching and see you next week.
Paint with Pittard, with Lynne Pittard.
An ocean wave, a nice seashore. This is the scene we're going to be working with today. The ocean scene, I think water is one of the most difficult paintings that you can work with. So today we're going to try to do a little different approach at our start. We're going to do a little bit of a sketch in. That way you'll have a little idea of the placement of color and it's not as likely to get lost. With the wet on the canvas, I do have the base coat already applied to the canvas. You'll see how my paints will move on. And we're going to do a little bit of a sketch. A lot of times you might find this to your advantage. You can block in your composition, and that way you don't have to get your coloring in areas where you don't want it. So I'm going to use a little bit of my phthalo green mix and a little bit of thinner. We're just going to do a little drawing. If you'll come up to the canvas, we'll sketch in our composition just roughly. I'm going to find my horizon line above the halfway point. Just going to lightly block in an area where the line is going to be at the horizon. Now you notice I'm not concerned about it being detailed, just kind of brushing it in, letting it flow easily with the base coat. That's going to be my distance and my horizon. I'm above center canvas. I'm also going to have 3 areas of light in my sky. I'm going to have a very light area off to the right. Then it's going to have another area of dark. This will be level 1, level 2, level 3. In my wave, I'm going to be having a wave in the distance kind of splashing, just breaking my horizon just slightly, and there'll be rocks in here. Now I know this is a very rough sketch, but it's to give you a little feeling of where we're headed. So there'll be a wave off in the distance. My water is going to be coming in from my right, and I'm going to be looking down the side of a wave. Also, as we block in, we're going to have an area of foam of the roll of the wave. We're going to lay that way down and just have that foam being kind of pushed by a surge of water. And this is going to be our area of foam in here. And the wave will actually be coming from this direction back here. So as I block in, I begin to get the feeling of where my water is coming in from the right, flowing off to the left, and then this will be our foam area. Okay. And we're going to have a little bit of a rock mass here. We'll have a boulder here in the foreground. And all I'm doing is just sketching in. We'll have a lot of flow of water down in the front of the rocks, splashing up around the rocks, and a smaller little area here. So as I get my sketch in, we want to also remember that underneath the wave, since our light impact is going to be over here, we're going to have a shadow cast by the foam. So here in front of that wave is going to be a little darker. Now, I'm using phthalo green, not because that's the coloring of the water, just to give me a rough sketch, and I will blend this into the other colorings. Okay, that's my basic layout and my positioning. So this is an area I want to leave a little bit light, so I will have that light area to work in for me. Okay, I'm going to start using a little bit of my Prussian blue into this, and I'm using my flat bristle brush. This is number 16, and it'll work very well for doing some of your sketch in. I'm going to work this coloring off into the distance just a little bit back where the horizon. I'm just taking long horizontal strokes to lay in just a little of that coloring. Also, we want to get a little area down in here. You'll find when I do my ocean scenes that I keep my brush moving quite rapidly and keep it flowing with lots of little slides and turns. This gives me color variety in my composition and also lets me get a lot of movement in the water. Okay, so I'm just kind of blocking in general areas. We're going to need to go up to the sky area, and I'm going to switch to a fan brush for that because I can cover more area with it. So in the sky, I'll take the fan brush, come in with a little of my phthalo green, and just block in. Now, if I lose my horizon, that's okay because I will reestablish it. Just block this in lightly, letting the base coat mix in. I've lost the horizon at this point, and I'm keeping it fairly light of my sky and my distance. Don't want to get too heavy or too dark. Okay, I'm going to leave this area of light here, number one. I'm going to leave that and just go in with a little bit of mix of phthalo and Prussian. That's phthalo green and Prussian blue. And I'm going to mix in kind of around that area. And I'm kind of scrubbing in. You can kind of hear the brush scrubbing on the surface of the palette, the canvas, and softening that area and blocking in this area. I'm making kind of horizontal strokes as I work. I'm using my little small palette because I'm not using a lot of paint. When I need more paint, I'll go down to the larger palette, which really has my, when I need more paint, I'll go down to that. So if I'm using my little small palette, if you can see, I'm just putting a little bit of paint onto the fan brush so I can start designing it. Scrubbing it in, making it darker, away from my light impact here. You can see the brush as I move quite rapidly, how I'm scrubbing the paint into the base coat and letting it just kind of mix. Now I will go down to the palette now, and at the palette I'm going to mix up a little more depth of color, a little more shadow. Let's go to the Prussian blue, which is the slightest touch of alizarin crimson into it. I want to be cautious I don't get too strong with that. Adding a little white to soften it. It's getting a little too vivid. So I'll add a little more phthalo green to it to bring it back up to the blues. I want to be careful I don't get too shadowed. I don't want a storm in this sky. I wanted a nice light sky with drifting clouds. Okay, as I work this in, I'm going to come back up and I'm going to work more over on the left side. Kind of block in. And one reason why I want to get this coloring a little richer over in here is it'll help pull out that foam or that splash in the distance. Now I've blocked in my coloring, keeping nice little loose edges for right now, and then we're going to soften it. All I'm going to do is take my my blender brush, and I'm going to soften it all together just to make it a subtle backdrop for my waves. I don't want to take away from my water composition. I just want to give us a nice backdrop. So with a large blender brush, I'm going to go back and forth softly, starting in my light area and crisscrossing and just hazing it off into the other areas, and working over to the left. Crisscross, blending, blending. You can see how that begins to leave that light impact. I just used the white of the canvas at this step. You can soften down at the horizon. Once again, the horizon is gone right now, but we will pull it back up. So that's nice and soft and subtle without using a lot of paint. If I wanted more impact of paint, I could use it. Let's go back with the fan brush, and I'm going to use a clean fan brush. I'm going to save that one. And I'm going to use a little titanium white, work it into the fan brush thoroughly. We'll make a little bit of cloud effect. So just around an edge to get a little bit of an edge, a little bit of interest, I'm just going to kind of dance in the corner of the brush and mix in and have a little floating cloud on the right, and I'm kind of pulling it horizontally. I want those stringy effects. I want those effects of those light wispy clouds that just kind of lay up there in different layers of the atmosphere. And as I mix, I'm picking up some of the blue that's on the canvas. Get rid of that little hair. And then we're going to just put a little bit of soft edges. A little variety in the sky without getting too busy. Wipe the brush, get a little more of your white, your thick titanium white, and maybe a few other little clouds off in the distance. See, I make nice, long, floating strokes. Keep that sky light. Okay, there's areas I'm purposely making a little lighter, that's so I'll get good contrast. So I'm softening down at the horizon so my horizon will show up. Okay, let's go in now with the same fan brush and block in our water. I'm going to use a little more of my Prussian and phthalo, but I still need to go back to my palette and get a little touch of alizarin. I'm going to go over to my larger palette. Sometimes I get a little confused. I'm going to set my small one down, and we'll work mainly on the large one, getting a little more of this sky color or the shadow colored, and pull that horizon out back here. Just slide the brush horizontally until you pull that horizon line out and brush it in. Now try not to get too much of your foam area or your water area here. Just get it in and let it get lighter as it goes off to the right. Just let it fade, fade, fade. Blocking in just a variety of colors to give color, interest in your water. And I'm keeping it lighter on the right and allowing it to be a little darker on the left. Okay. Bring a little of that color down in the foreground. Just balance that with cleaning the brush, scrubbing in a little down in the foreground area. Okay, there's a couple of other areas. You can see how my phthalo is beginning to disappear into the composition, and I want that to be a part of the painting anyway. So we're going to start finding our back edge of our foam. But before we start worrying about our foam and our distant foam over here, I'm going to just kind of loosen up that edge where the foam will be. I want to use a little shadow foam. I'm going to go with the fan brush, and I'm going to use this same color mix for the bottom or the shadow part of the foam. So I'm using this sky coloring or this lavender color, and I'm going to go down along the bottom edge. It's going to look kind of funny to you if you're not used to painting this way, but I need to establish this coloring. I'm going to just block it in. That's actually going to be fairly light when we get to that stage. And I'm going to have a little bit back over in here. It's not too strong back there, but when I put my white on. Before I go back into this area, I want to get a little rock in there. I've got my shadow foam, so I'm going to switch to my flat bristle brush. I'm going to wipe it. And we're going to go get just a little bit of our Van Dyke brown. I'm going to keep this one kind of grayed down, my Van Dyke brown, and I'm loading the brush on my palette with a little bit of that same sky mixture to keep it soft. I don't want to get too dark, so I'm pushing it into the flat bristle brush, and I'm going to actually design my little rock. Now, I haven't put the splash on completely, but I'm just going to use the side of the brush and put a little rock back there in the distance without a lot of detail and let it disappear into the water. I really only have to paint part of the rock. Let it just be kind of indicated. Maybe we need to come up a little taller on that, a little more paint on the brush, and we're going to come up and make that just a little higher, a little more contrast. So when we put that wave or that foam in there, you'll be able to see it a little more. Okay, that's going to be just a little indication of my distant rock, and I can go back and add more color to that if I feel I need it. With the fan brush, I'm going to need a clean, dry fan brush to do the next step, and I've already got two dirty, so I think we need to take the time to clean one. Clean the fan brush, make sure it's dry. Don't leave thinner in your paints. Only towards the very end or when we're using liner brush work do we want thinners in our paint. So you want to make sure it's always a dry brush, and we use the paint pretty much for the consistency. I'm going to use a little bit of the white on my fan brush, and that's my titanium white. Get it in, and let's get a little bit of that splash up here. We don't have to worry about it too much, but I'm just going to kind of lightly put a little distant splash on that rock back there. And then we're going to let it get kind of lost, because what we're going to do is be pulling some down in front of that. Okay. We need a little more color impact. Now we need to start pulling out. We're going to use a little reversal trick here. We're going to use a little of our distant dark water and pull out the foam by painting in the background water. With the flat bristle brush, we'll go back to that and we'll block it in. I'm using a little more Prussian, touch of phthalo in it, and to make this dark and rich, we're going to be using just a tiny, tiny bit of alizarin. You don't want to get too much of that alizarin in there. You want your water to be blue, and we want that translucent feeling to our water, our transparent type of effect. Now, to get the back of this wave right in this area, we have the foam we want to leave there. So I'm going to actually paint a little behind it, and I'm putting a very irregular, loose line across there. And you can see how I'm kind of dancing the brush over that. Pull this in a little bit. And to make my wave coming in from that direction, I'm just kind of sliding from that direction into our wave. And then let's level it out. This helps pull that foam, or that light area of the foam, in. And as I block it in, pushing a little more on the brush, we leave a little variety of the other colors. And I'm always trying to keep in mind this area to the right being a little lighter, because my light is over there. So the more action I put in my brush or the side of the brush, the more variety I'm going to get in to the movements of the water. Okay, let's also bring a little of this coloring down underneath the wave. Although I'm going to get much darker, I want you to see that shadow foam that I put in. And let's keep that irregular in its pattern. We don't want to have it too straight a line, so I'm breaking it up. I'm letting it diminish a little bit. I'm letting it taper back. And I'm going to level it out. and kind of stretch the paint. So we begin to get a feeling for that. Also, I'm going to put a little of this paint in there. Got a little brown on the brush from somewhere. Okay, I want to go ahead through a little more of the block in and a little more color placement. Let's go in for a little deeper blues and alizarin shadow. We'll work here in the foreground and underneath that wave a little bit longer. So as I use my flat bristle brush, we'll go to the palette, and we're going to load up some more Prussian into the same spot that I was working. This is the neatest I think I've had my palette in quite some time. Prussian blue, a little bit of that alizarin, and this is going to be my dark shadow underneath the wave. Work the paint into the brush thoroughly, and then we'll come back up and let's concentrate on this dark area under here. Just push it under. I kind of scrub it with that brush. You want to handle this brush carefully. It's a good bristle brush, but the bristles will break, so you don't want to get too rough with it. Lock it in, and if you want a little choppiness, just kind of put a little movement. Get a little bit of a swing to your stroke and give that variety. A little of that paint down in here. I'm concentrating on my block in and a basic rough end of the composition. All right, I'm beginning to fill in some of the lighter areas or the white areas on my canvas right now. And right here I'm going to have rocks, so I don't have to worry too much about that. Let's take a little more of that color on the same brush, load it up, and let's make a little bit of a wave back here, just in the distance, following the wave that's rolling in. And we've got a little trick I want to show you of how we're going to get that to pull out. I think it'll make it a little easier for you how you can get that variety. Okay, as we've got our block in, we're still at a roughed in stage. I want to make sure I get enough of this coloring in little patches in the foreground to create little shadow patches or depth to the water. We're going to try to make our water look transparent. Okay, in my foam, in my wave up here, I'm going to use my finger just for a moment and soften any hard line there. I'm going to kind of merge those colors to make that a subtle blending between one color and the next, and also kind of lightly on the top edge. That automatically helps my foam have a little more of a blending effect. Okay, let's use the same flat bristle brush and go to our burnt umber and our Van Dyke brown, and we'll block in our little rocks so we'll have an idea of where they're going to be placed, and that'll help show you how we've got our water working around one area to the other. I'm using mostly burnt umber, and I'm going to pull this rock in front of this and let it disappear down in the water. Working mostly with the burnt umber on the top. That'll give it a little more warmth or light up on the top edge. Block in a little more, and then we'll come back in. We need a little of this color over here. Just block it in, and we'll redesign those rocks. As we build and create this painting, we want to keep in mind that we're actually working for general mass areas or block ends, and then we start pulling in our details. I need a little more Van Dyke and burnt umber on this. So as we work, getting a little darker, even adding a little blue to my Van Dyke, so I get a little more richness at the bottom. So we're coming right down here, getting it much darker, and as I dab, I kind of dab my paints on to give myself a little texturing in the rocks. Let it go into the water area a little bit. We'll bring that water up underneath the rock. And the more I pat and give a variety of colors, the more interest I'll have in the rocks. We'll also be pulling some water over that rock. So as I'm blocking in, I need more paint, so I'll have to take just a second to go back to the palette, getting some darker brown, and getting a little more interest in my rocks. Okay, now we haven't done much to the water. All we've done is really just get a general block in. And I want to get a little more detail into that water. I want more variety of color. I want more interest in my water. So I'm going to clean my flat bristle brush, and I'm going to lay that coloring in with my flat bristle brush and take the sap green. Sap green will give a very, very interesting coloring to water. So I'm using sap green on the brush. And after I've established the blues and the phthalos, with the sap green, I'm going to go into the water, and back at the back, I'm going to just slide a little bit of that coloring and just kind of graze the canvas. It's kind of like a scrumbling technique. You just kind of let it slide across the surface of the canvas slightly and mix with the existing colors. Don't want too much of that back over in there. Okay, just graze it lightly, letting that color kind of skim across the top and put a little more interest. Now we'll be painting the top of that wave in a minute. But first I want to get these colors established and that variety into the paint. First time I put the sap green on there, I just didn't feel it was going to do the trick that I wanted it to, but it does after you get it worked into the composition. A little more, that sap green in the foreground, that will give you your depth and your variety of colorings in the water. I want to make sure I don't overbrush this. You've got to leave movements. You've got to leave color interest. So I'm kind of letting one color mix into another. We'll need a little more blue. Constantly loading my brush, making little patches of movements in the water. Let's get a little more depth of color around our water. Okay, I want to go in and work on the waves a little bit and the distance, but on the top edge, I'm going to do a little something different there, and I think you're going to like it. Before I do that, I want to check my color balance of my distance and straighten my horizon back out here and lose that horizon just a little bit. Let it be just a little bit back there in the distance. Okay. Now, let's go in and we're going to work with our palette knife just for a minute, and we're going to change the look of the horizon by using the palette knife with some titanium white. We're going to spread the paint out. You take your titanium white and spread your paint out flat across your palette, touch across it, and get a little ridge or a little roll. I'm going to come up to my canvas and show you the amount of paint. Now, you probably see the tape on there to stop the glare, but there's a little tiny roll of paint right across the blade of the knife. In order to get a good illusion of light from back over here on your water, you want to go into about a 45-degree angle and touch and just get a little bit of a sparkle line off in the distance over in that light area, and then just kind of bring those little sparkles down your canvas. If you want a little cresting or a little bigger, another wave in there, just put it in gently. You can stretch that paint with your knife. If I find I get excessive paint, I'll take my fan brush and I'll stretch the paint a little bit. Let's just bring in a few other little waves. Here's that one off in the behind it. And that gives me a little variety or texturing that I find works very well for this technique of the wave. Now with the same palette knife, I'm going to go back and get a little more, and we're just going to lay a little bit right across the top of the foam. Right in here where we expect the foam to be, I'm just going to pat a little bit of my paint, and this is titanium. That's very important. Don't use your thinner paint. And just pat it up across the little line there, and then I'm going to slide it off to the right. That helps me give that direction of that wave coming in from that direction. Stretch it, and then I'm going to take my fan brush clean, and I'm going to just kind of soften it into the wave. This will put the force of the wave from behind, and as I just kind of dab at the top edge and loosen that top edge, it'll give me a nice loose edge on the top, and it kind of rolls down into the shadows. That'll pull my wave from behind into the front. Let's just stretch a few of those streaks of paint and soften them. Just barely with the corner of my fan brush. I'm just stretching a little bit of the heavy paint. Now, with this area, if I find like I don't have enough shadow in there, I will go in and I'll rework that, or I'll put on a little stronger contrast color. Okay, let's go back underneath our wave where our shadow is underneath here, and a little more interest in there. I need to go back to the flat and get some more Prussian, a little more phthalo, and get more impact. Let's go just a few more waves, just a few more movements. And now it's just a slide of the brush, and it mixes with the color that's already there. It gives me a little more variety. Pull it right up onto the rock a little bit. We'll pull some water down over those rocks also. Okay, making sure I don't have any empty holes. With my palette knife, I'm going to use it quickly with the palette knife technique to put in little chops of water and foam as it's washing down around these rocks. You get lots of movement and lots of action. If you've got a good established background, you'll find that this sparkle effect works quite well. And I'm really using the knife, the horizontal edge, and blocking that in. Let's get just a little more paint on the knife and come in and bring a little wash around here. Sometimes I bring it right up on there, onto the rock, and a little bit more. I have to keep going back for some of that titanium white. Little interest. Now, what I do when I've laid the paint into the composition, a lot of times I like to take a fan brush and I like to redesign it. But before I do, let's check a little bit on some of these little areas, maybe a little more wash coming off from the right. So I get that real impact of that paint coming more from the that wave is coming more from this direction than it is coming in straight at us. Okay, need to check some of my lines. All right, we need to take the fan brush and clean it in our odorless thinner and soften some of these little foam patches here. Let's just bring a little of that water up around that rock, up around this rock, just catching the little bits of paint I left there, and let it be coming down off of the rock. So we just do that by just pulling it just a little bit around it. This is where you wouldn't want to overbrush it and lose all your technique or your action and contrast. Okay. I've got some work I want to do onto my rocks, and I know they need a little highlighting and all, but I don't know if I'm going to have time. I'm going to take the base coat and use my, just take a little bit and just let a little water run down over the rocks a little bit after it's loosened up, and the paint will come off easily. So I'm just really kind of letting water come down, maybe splash around the bottom a little bit, and set those rocks into the water. You don't want to get too much base coat on the brush. Kind of take it and soften it. Okay, a little bit running down right between a little crack over there. With the fan brush or the knife, you can lay in some nice, interesting little areas of water. Let's just slide with the fan brush, see if we can get a little more detail on the surface of the water with the white. I leave the shadow back up underneath to keep that captured as being dark underneath there. I don't want to use base coat on the top part of the wave because it will be too thin, and it's very likely if you're working in a lot of thin paints it'll get down into mud. So I'm going to use a little more of my titanium white and go up to the top and try to pull out just a little more impact of the foam. There it comes. Just kind of dab it on. Very similar to the cloud effect that we work with. And then soften it into the shadow underneath there, so we get that feeling. Didn't get it coming too much in the direction I wanted it. I wanted that impact a little more coming in from the right, as if it's washing in. I need to straighten that or level that wash out there. Okay, we have an area here I need to work on. I'm going to go in with my flat bristle brush and create a contrast. I'll go back to a little bit of my green color. And right in this area, I'll just put a little more color and pull it off to the right. And that'll give me a nice contrast area where I can see that back edge of the foam. If you lose your contrast, you need to go back in sometimes and build up your colors. Let's reshape this wave a little bit just by using the flat bristle brush and moving that paint a little. I know I need a little area in here that I need to work and reshape some of that layout of the water. So as I play in the water here, we'll try to make sure I don't lose my contrast, and I'll reshape some of the waves, and I definitely will go in and pull up some of those rock contrast edge. Just as I'm doing that, I'll probably have to say goodbye, and I'll finish up and I'll pull some nice sharp edges just like that, if you can see that, and we'll see you next week, and we'll be doing another scene, and we hope you learn a lot of tricks. Thank you. Now we're going to take the same large brush, get a little more pigment on. That's Prussian blue on the big blender. And remember, these are natural bristle brushes working in the oil paints. Want to also mention to you, we do not clean these bristle brushes with soap and water, these large ones. It has a tendency to make them gummy. So I want to point that out to you because some people have been writing in their letters and they've been wondering why their brushes don't seem to last. They work clean out thoroughly with your odorless thinner. And we want to not use soap and water in your large natural bristle brushes. Okay, I'm working this color in, getting it a little deeper, a little darker, adding a touch more alizarin into the blue mixture. This shouldn't be able to give me enough contrast, so at the bottom of the trees, I get a little more distinction of color as I work down and level off at the distant shoreline. I'm keeping this very indistinct, but I want lots of little movements. I want variety of color mixes, so I kind of pat up in there and leave little specks, and I'm not using a lot of paint. I'll also bring a little of that color into the water with a little downward pull or vertical pull. Not trying to put in much in the way of distinction. Okay, as I've worked in that color mix, I think I'll go for a little more contrast, just a touch more, one more time. This way I can gradually build up. If I get too strong in my colors too quickly, it has a tendency to overpower it, and then it's very difficult to get the color out. So I find I kind of check my composition as I go. Right down here in the back, at the bottom of the trees, I'm going to pat just a little more, and that'll give me another level or another illusion of other trees in front. Okay, and a little more in the water. Let's block in over here at the water area and get that a little stronger. I'm putting less and less pressure as I come over to the left, but that being lighter on the left because of my light source. Also, the little rays that I want to indicate here, I'm going to just kind of lightly pull a little more with this brush and just give that little feeling of that streaky lined effect. Okay, sometimes I put white on the brush and do it with a little white. Okay, that's all we're going to do for the backdrop. Now we're going to go and use another brush. I'm going to save this brush, and I'm not going to clean it because I'll use it for a larger block-in with darker colors. I'm going to switch to the fan brush, and with the fan brush, we're going to take a little bit of a titanium white with just a little of cadmium yellow in it and a speck of green. Get a very, very light mix of a soft green. With this coloring, I'm going to go off into the distance, and I'm going to find a little point of land. Now notice how light that is. I hope you can see enough of the contrast, but I want that light coming down and lighting up that point. So I'm going to just let it soften as it comes over and then taper over. By walking over and kind of tying into the bottom of this, it'll have a tendency to let this be in front of the background and push that farther back. I'm going to take a little more paint. Once again, that's my green. If I want it a little bit stronger, which I do, I'm going to add just a little more green to it, loading up quite a bit of paint or pushing the paint into the brush so as I work into it, it will come out. Let's start over here because I've got stronger or more strength of color. Let's block in from the right, and then as I go over to the left, I put less pressure and I just let it kind of tie in to that coloring. And this is going to be a distant look across the little embankment or pond. Just maybe a little reflective illusion. We really actually have 3 levels of color, not only in our sky, but in our distant grass area. We've got it light, I would consider that level 1, 2, and 3. Light, medium, and dark, and we also have our light at the top, and then we put in some medium. And let's get a little bit more medium green color, add a little more green to it, and we're going to go even darker. So I'm really layering my effect of coloring. This is a little darker, and I'm laying it just underneath this mixture. And it kind of ties in. If you want it to tie in a little more, you just gently lift up. I'm taking the brush and just kind of flipping it up into the last color mix that I put on. Then I'm going to come in one more time with another load of the brush, and with the green, without cleaning the brush, I'm going to add some Van Dyke brown. With the Van Dyke brown, this will be my shadow effect, or my depth and dark of the coloring. So with the brown, I'm going to come right in along my shore and block this in, and just kind of tapering off over on the left. I'm also going to pull a little of this coloring down into the water, so I just touch into it and flip down and just kind of bring long, streaky lines to pull in that reflection along that shoreline. Pull it down, and sometimes we lightly shimmer it, although we're not through with that illusion. Okay, so we've pretty well blocked in, and if one looks like it's not tied into the other, sometimes I go in there and I just soften it slightly with a little bit of an upward lift to gently merge the 2 colors so they're not too much of a, there is not too much of a hard line there. Okay, I'm going to clean the fan brush one more time, or wipe it, add more sap green into the brush, the same spot, and I'm going to add a little more of the Van Dyke brown. If I want it darker, I could add a touch of blue. We want to get this mix quite dark, and it's a very rich green effect, and I'm going to work in down where I'm going to have a little clump of trees off in the distance. So I'm going to plan for that. As I block this in right here, I'm going to pull that color down. That's a little bit too rich a green. Let's go back in and get a little more brown and soften that. If it gets too dark, I'll add just a little touch of the white to soften it. I'm going to watch your colors. We don't want to have anything strange happening, so it's a little better mix of green. I'm going to block in a little clump where we're going to have trees, and let's just pull it down, and this is going to reflect. So right now we don't have a distinct illusion, but we do begin to build on this. Let's build it up and have a few little bushes. I turn the brush on its side and push up a little grouping of bushes. Now, if you want good control of your brush, you want to sometimes go in for looser leaf effect. The fan brush has a tendency to come in and put little lines out and not give you the detail unless you do a lot of little padding. I want to go to my 1-inch brush and get a little better block in. So I'm going to put the fan brush aside, and switch to my 1-inch foliage brush and go into that same mix. But as I build this tree area or clump area, I'm going to work with my light on my left and work over to the dark on my right. So let's take a little bit of yellow into my green and white and soften the color. And as we build it, we're going to have that much lighter towards our light impact. That's yellow, white, a little bit of green mix. So as I break this up, I'm going to have a little bit of light, and I'm going to lightly touch in and make this loose leaf tree effect. And this is very similar to one of the other scenes I did in one of the earlier shows, but I also didn't get a chance on one of the earlier shows to do the proper highlighting and to go back in and work on this. So I do want to take time this time to make it even a better effect and see if we can get that. We'll also have a little reflection of it. That's my medium color. So, my light color. Let's go in a little darker, adding a little more green, touch of blue to it, getting a little deeper. And I'm just really making little clumps and leaving the trees to be kind of loose and airy. And I want to see the background through it. So I'm attaching to this what I call a medium color. Also want to make sure you bring that down into the water so you get a nice reflective illusion. And then we'll go in for our dark. And I'm going to add brown back to the palette, brown into this green, and get it darker. Remember, I'm patting the 1-inch brush. If you can look up close on the palette, I'm patting the brush into the paint so it doesn't mat the bristles together. If you mat the bristles together, it'll have a tendency to make a very concentrated pat, and that's not what we're looking for. Okay, this is off on the right side of the tree, and a few little pats to the left. And that basically is my foundation. It doesn't look too distinct or too detailed right now, but we're not ready for the details. While I have this coloring on my brush, I'm going to loosely block in my front area. You'll find that this is a very easy way to do it, and I just want to gently shimmer right along the edges. Well, let's take a clean brush to do that. I'll go back to my large blender, pull that down just a little more, and then gently go across it horizontally. This way I can lay the other coloring onto it without losing it too much. So I'm going back to the 1-inch brush, a little more of the dark. That's my sap green, a little touch of Prussian blue, and a little bit of my Van Dyke or umber, whichever color you like. The umber's a little warmer. I'm patting into it, and I'm going to bring up my foreground area. Now I'm taking the 1-inch brush, touching the canvas, and folding the brush to get this little feeling of grassy bank or embankment here in the foreground. As I block across here, I'm looking for a little bit of a irregular or loose edge line to block in the grasses. And I want it just a straight shore. So as I'm blocking in, you can begin to see how this is pulling together. Now I have a large tree grouping on the right. I'm going to just loosely bend that over. Now when I run out of the paint here, I'll have a tendency not to get excessive here, and it'll be light. I'm allowing it to be kind of light there as I loosely block up, and then I will get darker. So sometimes I purposely let my paint run out for certain areas so I can build onto them, and this way I'm keeping my light behind my darks, which happens to be where the light filters through the trees. Okay, maybe a little grouping over here. I'm just going to put a few little pats while I have this coloring on, have a few little loose trees over here on the right, just for interest, no detail. Okay, as you can see, the block in, I need a lot more work done on the right-hand side. Let's go back to the palette, and let's reload the brush with some more dark. Need some more sap green, a little more Prussian blue, a little Van Dyke. And if I were to run out of my color mix that I wanted, and I have a lot of Prussian blue on my palette, a lot of times I'll mix my green up by using Prussian blue, and like some yellow ochre makes a very nice green, or you can use your Prussian blue with a little yellow, and you'll come up to a mixture that's very similar to your sap green. So if you're out of sap green and you have a lot of blue or a yellow in your palette, you can use that and make your own green. Let's go back down into the bottom here so we get more shadow, more depth, more contrast area. Block in, and notice the little speckles, the looseness that you get with the 1-inch brush. If you mat it together and form a nice tight brush, you would be able to do a different type of tree, but you want to be careful that you don't overdo the texturing or the little dots that we get when we use this brush. Okay, I think we're going to need a few more little pats of color for a little more color variety. I've left it very light in here to let that light be in the background. Let's just check it. Maybe a little more of this coloring over here and a pat or two at the bottom of those trees. As I work, I try to keep my colors kind of balanced and flowing. Now it's beginning to look a little strange because we haven't done anything to our land or our mixed areas of the distant grass embankment or any detail reflections. So we need to go in and look at that area right now and maybe pull that pond out in the distance and really begin to see that water effect. I'm going to put the large or the small 1-inch brush down and go back to the fan brush that I had left with the brown and the green in it. And go just a little heavier on the brown. Right now I'm using a little umber into the brush. And I'm going to come back down along the shoreline and just darken it a little bit. Just enough to give that a little more separation of color. Wipe the brush if I get too much, and then pull a little into the reflection. That just helps give me a little finer contrast area before I go on. Now, as we're going into the composition and we start working in on some of the details, I want you to realize that we have another area that we're going to be working on. And as we work on these other areas, it's just going to take a fine suggestion. There's a number of ways we could approach the trunks and the trees and the branches, but we're going to work a little bit with palette knife. So with the palette knife, I'm going to go in and I'm going to pick up a little bit of white, and that's titanium white, and I'm going to spread it out across my palette and have it very flat and touch across it. And the first thing I'm going to go to is where the water line would be at the back of the shore. And right back here in the distance, I'm just going to set a little light line, let it fade into the shadows, so that pond looks like it's going back around the little bend there. So I'm just laying in a little bit of white, a little more on the knife, and put on a little shoreline. And we haven't come in with our fine detail in there, and plus I'll bring a little shadows in, but I wanted to get that in. Okay, let's put a little trunks in, and with that I'm going to use the knife. Sometimes I prefer to use the liner, but we'll do it with the knife this time. I use the palette knife, and I'm going to loosely put a little roll of paint up the knife blade, and I'm going to touch and bring just a fine line up and indicate a few little trunks. These are broken lines. I try not to make them too tight, too distinct. Plus we'll have a little reflection of them, just a little hint of them in the water. Right now they're not detailed, but we will polish them up and fix them up. I like to get my composition kind of blocked in loosely before I worry about all the details. Details should always be saved for the last. Okay, that's just an indication there. And while we have the knife work going, let's pick up a little more of this color, dark, and let's go over to the foreground, and we'll pull in a little larger trunk effect and just come right up, let it fade. We'll have two little trunks. As you can see, they're beginning to be blocked in, but they don't have texture, they don't have light, they don't have contrast, and I like to get the bulk of the tree done usually with my knife and indicate a few of the branches, and then we'll come back and we'll put highlight, shadow, and we'll actually form that tree with a little more interest. A lot of times I'll take a flat bristle brush. If I don't do knife work, I'll block that in with the flat bristle brush, and then I'll paint it in. There's so many options I hope I can cover in this series. If I can't get them all covered in this particular series, I hope that I'll be able to come back and show you some more things. As I take the flat bristle brush, I'm going to use a little titanium white with some umber and work it into the flat bristle. And let's just get a little bit of light on the edge of that tree on the left side. And as I touch into it and just slide that brush up, you'll see that it'll stand out. And if it doesn't stand out enough, I'll have to make my paint a little thinner. This is where you have to watch. I'll use a little base coat. You have to watch your consistency of the paint to see if it's going to perform like you want it to. So we're using the flat bristle brush, and let's see if I can get my hand out of the way. And I touch and slide right up the right side of the tree. I should say the left side of the tree, and pull up that edge. And I'm just going to rough the two colors together a little bit. That's the brown and the other color mixing slightly. Just get a block in. Put a few little interesting branches. We have a lot to do to tie that in. Let's get a little bit more Van Dyke, burnt umber, maybe with a little blue in it. We want shadow. We want this dark. We want, with the light coming from the left, you'd have shadows cast on that tree. So I'm putting a little extra impact of shadow and dark in here and just hitting up along the trunk to make it look like maybe there's a branch of another tree casting a shadow or some leaves. We'll also do some detail work there. Let's just leave that there because I have some little flowers I want to get to. Stretch your little trunks down, just soften them or pull them into the reflection illusion. Okay, With the liner brush, we're going to put a little bit of detail on the trunks of these trees, maybe a little hint back here. And I'm going to go to my liner brush and need my small palette to work on. And we'll work with the liner brush and try to pull in the highlight on the trees in the distance. With the liner, I'll go to some base coat, which is already thinned down. Sometimes I add a touch of umber to it if you don't want it too white. If you want it to look like birches, that's fine. Put a little color in it. But I want it to have that spark of light hitting on the left side. As that light filters through the trees, it'll catch a little edge, and we'll have just that little impact of light hitting. If you want texture, use your liner brush upright, or the side of it, and just kind of pat it up along the edge, and let that light kind of hit on the edge. You can also come over here and just pat. You can get texture with the liner if you use it on its side, and sometimes it'll give you a very good effect, more of a bark effect. Okay. We also are going to use that same brush, thin down, and we're going to use a little reflective light into the tree, or on the trunk of the tree. And with this blue, I'm using Prussian blue with my white, and I'm going to pull out the shadow side, or the reflective side of the tree. So we find that by using reflective lights, and we can also tie in with a few scratches. Okay, we need some work done on the tree on the left, and we need highlights and shadows a little bit in there filtering through the trees. So as we start tying this together, I'm going to go ahead and move along while I've got this color on my brush. Let's bring a few trunks back here in the distance, way back on those little far distant trees. Okay, I want to switch to my fan brush just for a moment and straighten out that back edge. And I just need a little more white, that light green, and I want to make sure that this flat level of grass comes down in front of those. I want to keep those pushed way back into the distance. So as I bring that in, I'm just touching the brush sideways, and it keeps me, oops, don't want to bring too much dark over here. Okay, wipe the brush, and let me soften that back down into there. That's better. Okay, back to the 1-inch brush. Now I have a 1-inch brush that's loaded with dark paint, but I'm going to use it for my highlights. So one way to work and get this to work for you is to squeeze out the excess with your palette knife. If you look up real close, I squeeze out the extra paint and just kind of put it aside in case I need to go back in with more darks. And then I'm going to take this brush and I'm going to dip it a little bit into my base coat medium. Just kind of dunk it right on the end. Then I'll go over to my palette and pull in some yellow. That's going to give me my light green. That's base coat white, yellow, with a little bit of the green already in there. Leaving that green in the brush helps you get the color mix that you want. I'm going to put a little bit of this loose leaf foliage and redesign those trees just slightly up at the top with little touches, and occasionally bringing a little branch down over. Need a little more paint on that. Let's get a little more yellow into that, a little more strength of color. Just lightly pat a few little foliage areas. Maybe a little bit down here on the edge of the bank. Remember, you can always go back in and touch up and work some of the areas with a little more darks and lights. I'll probably come back in with the liner brush and do some tree illusions. With the large brush, I'm going to gently shimmer this water area just a little bit, just to finish that off and soften it. Okay, I want to get to some little flowers, then I can always go back in and work up on more of the greenery and the foliage, and I also want to bring in a little shore. This is an important step. To really push that back, I'm going to take the time to use my fan brush and go right back up here and let there be a little bank in there. Just by indicating it, it'll happen there. Now we have a little grassy bit area right there underneath the trees. That begins to really polish it out. And we'll come back in with the liner and put some more trunk work in there. Okay, for your little flowers in the foreground, it'll pull your background in. I'm going to go to a clean foliage brush because I want the paint to come off very easily. And I'll dip straight into base coat with my foliage color. With my base coat into my foliage brush. And I'm going to be going back to that background color, but I'll start with my lightest color as I pat gently the base coat. And if we have time, we're going to spatter paint a few of them, but I'm going to gently place a few little speckles. By barely touching the canvas, I get these little white patches, and they're going to be like little flowers. I start off with my lightest color, then I go in and I'm going to pick up just a little blue into it. Gives me a little shadow blue. This is our sky color. And you can make these flowers red if you like, but I'm just going to use strictly the light colors. A little patch of blue. And then we're going to go to some lavenders. We're going to go into that nice, pretty background color. That's Prussian. And this time I'm going to add a little bit of my alizarin crimson to bring up kind of a purple color. And you can make it match your decor. And as I pat into this, I want little tiny dots. Let me get that brighter. Let's go back. I want you to really see the impact that this could have. That's my base coat and alizarin. We're going to get that stronger, just so you can see the impact that we can get. Sometimes I like blue flowers, and sometimes I like little lavender ones. Maybe a touch back into the distance. Okay, we need to work in and down at the base of the bushes, and especially do some liner brush work. Liner brush work will really tie this together, and maybe even some light on that little field there in the foreground. With the liner brush, I'm going to clean it, and we're going to go in with the, I'm going to use my small palette for this next step. And I'm going to thin down some of my brown and umber with some odorless turp, and really get some of the detail work to pull this together. Sometimes a nice little silhouetting little branch over here is a good effect. And we'll put in a little detail there. Little twig. Another branch coming off of the tree. These are the steps that are so important for you to take your time and not be rushed at. Let's bring one hanging down and get into more and more detail that pulls your painting together. In this time that I'm allowed, we really do get rushed in some of these illusions, and they don't turn out just as well as I would like them to, but you do get the effect that we're trying to show you, and the details are the general technique that we're trying to show you. Okay, as I tighten up or straighten up these little trunks here at the base, I think I'm going to go in with the 1-inch brush and put a few little of these shadow colors. I'm going to use just a little phthalo and white, and see if we can put a little hint of reflective lights in down at the bottom. And I'm going to work on this one a little bit and get a few little bushes. I want to thank you for joining. I hope I've helped you a little bit with some foliage. Thank you again for watching, and we hope to see you next week.